Boyle Heights has this long history of being a vulnerable community and sanctuary at the same time, of people of color, working class people. It's also ground zero or battleground for gentrification and displacement. And on the flip side of that, people digging deeper roots and belonging. And in that aspect, it was the perfect place for ACTA to start doing this work and to look at this place not from a deficit, which is what typically has happened throughout history.
Inequality, racism, and injustice are sickening, but it hasn't been always clear that they can make us sick as well. The victims of it can have all kinds of ailments of the body and mind, but even the perpetrators of injustice wind up being unhealthy because of what inequality and injustice do to the social fabric. If the diseases are caused by social practices, we can find the cure in counter practices, in the survival strategies that aggrieved communities have developed to turn poison into medicine, to turn the toxic into the tonic. Traditional arts aren't the only road to this, but they're an important road because it's one that's been laid out over centuries by communities. Practices have been passed down across generations, and these practices revolve around participation, they revolve around imagination, they revolve around calling communities into being through performance. They serve as repositories of collective memory. They can be guides of moral instruction.
The Alliance for California Traditional Arts, or ACTA, began its work in Boyle Heights with the Participatory Cultural Asset Mapping Project. And so we really found those places where people naturally convened and asked what they value and how they see themselves in their community. And that gave us an understanding of what the resources were. And when you understand what the resources are, you can move forward and be proactive and base your strategy on what you have that can meet what is needed. Based on that information from the cultural asset mapping, ACTA was able to look at the different focuses that the work groups in building healthy communities had. So restorative justice, street vending was one at the time, affordable healthcare for all. We started to look at those different people that were mentioned in the asset mapping, particularly artists that were mentioned. We looked for artists that held process and that understood how to work in community.
Bendita sea la tierra donde sembraron la semilla, donde sacaron el agua.
Collective songwriting really brings the community in to do the work of music. It really brings them in to engage in that process. And by having them be a part of that process gives them a sense of ownership to the ideas, to the discussions that are taking place while they're creating music, as a way of articulating something beyond what's written on paper or what's being suggested by somebody else. This is something that music allows them to create for themselves.
As artists, we're altar makers, and when you make an ofrenda, an altar, you're creating a sacred space.
We start with a ceremony with sage to clear the air of things that are impinging on their thinking right now, just leaving all their titles so that we could all be on an even keel to be able to participate and especially listen to each other, and that everyone's voice has the same value.
When we lift each other up, there's this feeling of safety, there's feeling of confidence that I am being heard.
Rosanna and Ofelia have developed a whole theory around how a meeting could run utilizing ACTA, which is arriving, agreeing, connecting, affirming. And it's a whole process that you go through again and again and again. And so for this work not to be exhaustive and extractive and dehumanizing, we're trying to make these spaces humanizing.
In working with this group, bringing ACTA into the meeting was our way of creating a sacred space. You're stepping into this awareness with each other. We transitioned into this work using our traditional art form of altar making and creating sacred spaces, respect and remembrance, and affirming our roots, affirming who we are, connecting. It's all in there.
It all started with a 10-week workshop that was Restorative Justice Youth Radio Pilot Project. And from here it was a community inquiry led by youth, facilitated by Omar, into What is this? Restorative justice is not simply a way to deal with discipline, it's a way to reinstate holistic health. And so it requires, for everybody, including family members, including admin, including teachers, including students, to be held accountable, to hold themselves accountable in the process and to participate fully.
Restorative cultural arts praxis is a theory where a synthesis between Chicano art, aesthetics, approaches are merged in a very fluid way with restorative justice principles and practices. So when we're working in schools or communities, the idea is that not just the artist becomes empowered and not just the participants become empowered, but everybody becomes empowered. When you look at Los Streetscapers, Judy Baca murals, Irena Cervantes' murals, you realize that there's like this idea that the participants are being empowered along with the artists. The ideas of storytelling are a necessary component of restorative justice. It's an art form in itself. This holistic approach allows that to happen. It also empowers people through affirming culture. Restorative justice through discipline doesn't do that. If you have restorative justice live outside of discipline, there's an opportunity for more healing and holistic wellness to happen because you're including people's identities, people's experiences, people's histories more into an approach.
La comunidad está aquí, no se va, y las organizaciones van y vienen. Ellos no saben cómo expresamos, cómo nos sentimos, qué nos pasa, porque no viven aquí. Personas de la comunidad sí sabemos las carencias que tenemos, las necesidades, los traumas que vienen de generación tras generación. Al usar el quilting es una manera de unirnos y usarlo como herramienta para empezar a sanar desde nuestros ancestros a la actualidad. En los momentos que he tenido yo los talleres, hemos tenido la confianza de hablar y sacar aquello que veníamos cargando desde atrás. Una persona en especial me dijo que gracias a ese taller, ella tuvo el valor de sacar algo que le estaba quemando y pudo romper esa cadena para poder pedir ayuda. Este es mi ancla para empezar a unir a la organización con la comunidad.
The idea of participation is key in restoring humanity, and restoring dignity, and restoring all these things that we've been fractured from during the period of colonization for the last 500 plus years. And so when you start to reattach yourself to the idea of participation, it's sort of a power that you're holding. And it's not a power that someone gives you, it's a power that you give yourself by being vulnerable, by opening up parts of yourself in space and finding your voice.
I think the potential impact of the actual corridos written is that they open up feelings that maybe you never thought that other people could express for you. You're using music, oh yeah, it's fun, it sounds groovy, like you can dance to it, but hey, the message is there. The way that Mexican folk music in my life plays out in my city, with my people, with my family, it's just very inviting to collaborate in a collective form because everybody's just there having fun and wanting to contribute to something bigger. It's that repetition that gets everybody on the same plane, you know, and then opens them up to want to talk about issues, about, you know, whatever it be. We're taking the stories of the youth, what they would like to benefit from, and what they are trying to say to the community. The corrido is what's going to help that idea be spread apart.
In the Coachella Valley, we did work for a couple years through the Building Healthy Communities there. And this was a really special place. We were working directly with Purépecha people from Michoacán, Mexico, who are now living in the Eastern Coachella Valley as farm workers. And it was a great example of how indigenous and traditional cultures facilitate power, facilitate relationships, and facilitate space and place. It was a great example for us to bring back to Boyle Heights and then try to implement different things based on what we learned over there.
La curiosidad de conocer el tejido llamado aguja maravillosa abrió las puertas para conocer palabras purépechas y conocer más de la cultura. A través de este arte aprendimos a bordar y a compartir nuestros conocimientos de parte de nuestras experiencias como compañeras.
Somos mujeres fuertes que queremos cambiar nuestra comunidad y ayudar a nuestros hijos a superarse en su educación para que logren llegar a la universidad y que tengan un mejor porvenir para obtener mejores opciones fuera del campo.
The arts are not just ornamentation or reflection on a world that exists. The arts are a way of intervening and creating new social relations. And whether it's people doing hip hop as representatives of houseless people on Skid Row in Los Angeles, whether it's young people doing posters about fair housing at the Hope Fair Housing Center in Chicago, people are speaking up, standing up, and fighting back against the world that has been handed to them. And they're also creating a picture of the world that they and many of us want to live in.